In n8n, every workflow starts with a trigger. What is a trigger? What is a trigger? Trigger is an event that tells the system when to start the automation. So without a trigger, the workflow will not start. For example, when an email comes, or when the time reaches, or when the form is submitted, or when the data changes. So the workflow start automatically. So these starting events are called as a triggers. Now let's see that different type of trigger in n8n. The first trigger is a manual trigger. So manual trigger starts the workflow when we click on the execution button. So it is mainly used for testing and learning. For example, when you click on that trigger, the workflow will start. So manual trigger is not used for real automation. It is used for only testing. The next trigger is a webhook trigger. Webhook trigger start that workflow when a request come from outside. It come from a website, or it come from a form, or it can from an API, or that it can from the other application. So for example, when a form is submitted for the end user, so we need to trigger the workflow. So the webhook receives some data. Based on the data, the workflow will start. So webhook is one of the most important trigger in a n8n. Next trigger is a schedule trigger. Schedule trigger run workflow at a specific time. For example, you want to run your automated workflow every day at 9 a.m. either every hour, either every month, or every week, something like. So basically, it is used for reporting, or taking a backup, or notification to the end user, or data synchronizations. This trigger runs automatically on based on the time. The next trigger is a app trigger. This trigger runs when something happen in the app. For example, there is a Gmail app. So when you receive the new email. Similarly, there is a app is a Telegram. So when you receive the new message. So there is an app called Google Sheet. There is a one row is added, something like. So that time only we need to trigger our events, or trigger our workflow starts. So this is used for mainly connecting the different applications. Next trigger is the database trigger. Database trigger runs when the data changes in the database. For example, there is a new record is added in the database, or the data was updated in the database, or some data is deleted in the database. So when the data changes happens, then the workflow start automatically. So used for backend automation. The next trigger is a file trigger. So the file trigger is a trigger when runs a file is added or changed. For example, there is a file is uploaded in the drive, or a file is added in the server. So our file is changed in the folder. So when file changes happens, then workflow starts. So this is a file trigger. The next trigger is a chatbot trigger. The chatbot trigger starts when message is received. So there are some apps where we can receive the messages like Telegram bot, WhatsApp bot, and chatbot are AI automations. So when receive any message from these apps, then that our workflow will start. For example, user send a message, our workflow runs, bot replies, something like. So in n8n, the trigger is the starting point of the workflow. Without trigger, automation will not start. A different type of triggers are used in a different situation like time specific, email, form, database, file, or API. So understanding of the trigger is the first step for learning of n8n automation.